Welcome to today's Explainer. We are diving into a truly fascinating intersection that we uncovered in the source documents. It's this incredibly weird, exact place where open, public physics research collides head-on with the deeply classified, super-secretive world of corporate aerospace engineering. We're talking about the quest for propellantless propulsion, or, well, what most of us just casually call anti-gravity. For decades, right? This whole idea has pretty much lived on the fringes of acceptable science. But as we're going to see today, some of the absolute biggest, most heavily funded organizations on the planet have actually taken a very, very close look at how to break the bonds of gravity. To give you an idea of just how seriously this is taken behind closed doors, check out this internal quote. This is from a Boeing briefing document regarding a project they called GRASP. It says, and I quote, "If gravity modification is real, it will alter the entire aerospace business." I mean, wow. That is not a throwaway line from some sci-fi paperback. That is a foundational concern coming from one of the literal titans of the aerospace industry. When a company that literally builds the planes we fly in every single day is secretly investigating seemingly impossible physics, you kind of have to stop and ask why. What exactly do they know, or maybe what are they hoping to discover that the rest of us don't?
All right, let's jump into Section 1, the physics of gravity, and understanding the impossible.
Okay, let's dive into this by laying down the fundamental science. Because obviously, before we can talk about anti-gravity, we really need to understand the force we're actually trying to counteract here. You and I experience gravity every single second of our lives, right? It aggressively keeps our coffee cups planted on our desks and keeps our feet on the ground. But from a pure physics perspective, it's deeply, deeply confusing. Our sources define anti-gravity simply as reducing, canceling, or protecting against the effect of gravity. But gravity itself is just uniquely strange. To put it in perspective, gravity is 10 to the power of negative 39 times weaker than the strong nuclear force, meaning it is mind-bogglingly weak. And yet, it's strong enough to reach across infinite distances and completely dominate the entire macroscopic universe. So if you're trying to build an anti-gravity machine, you're trying to manipulate a force that is somehow simultaneously the weakest, yet the most stubborn thing in our daily reality. Nature really, really does not want us to float.
Our understanding of this force has obviously evolved over centuries. You go from Copernicus theorizing a heliocentric solar system way back in 1543 to Johannes Kepler mapping planetary motion, and then boom, Sir Isaac Newton publishes the universal law of gravitation in 1686. He actually proved mathematically that gravity follows an inverse squared relationship with force and distance. And then Henry Cavendish came along and physically measured this gravitational force in the 1790s. So we've had the math for hundreds of years. But, and this is a big but, doing the math to describe how gravity acts is very, very different from actually understanding what gravity fundamentally is. And that brings us to a massive roadblock in modern physics. Einstein's general relativity basically tells us that anti-gravity is impossible without something called negative mass. And interestingly enough, negative mass isn't even a thing in the standard model of particle physics. Then, on the flip side, we have the unified field theory. Physicists have done an amazing job unifying 3 of the 4 fundamental forces: electromagnetism, the strong nuclear force, and the weak nuclear force. But gravity? It's the odd man out. It is completely unexplained in this model. I mean, scientists have theorized this particle called a graviton since the 1930s to try and explain it, but we've literally never proven it exists. Gravity is, for all intents and purposes, a glaring glitch in our unified understanding of the universe. Moving right along to Section 2, Early Pioneers and Experiments. The quest begins. Because mainstream physics basically slapped a giant, impossible sticker on anti-gravity, the actual real-world attempts to build gravity-defying machines were shoved way out to the fringes of traditional science. For the last 100 years or so, our public perception has mostly been this shiny sci-fi dream. You know the ones. Floating rooms, sleek spaceships, effortlessly hovering over lunar landscapes, just totally defying physics with the flip of a switch. And this brilliantly illustrates that dream. But when we dig into the source material, the actual reality of these pioneering aerospace experiments was way grittier, highly complex, and scrutinized under a very heavy microscope. Take a look at this, for example. This is the 1920s work of Thomas Townsend Brown. He actually coined the term electrogravitics and patented a whole concept for a device he called a gravitator. Brown used extremely high voltages coupled with asymmetric high dielectric fields. Okay, in plain English, it's often called asymmetric capacitance. Think of it kind of like creating an electrical pressure imbalance between 2 differently sized, highly charged plates. When he blasted a high voltage into these distinct electrodes, the apparatus would seemingly produce thrust. Now, critics jumped on this and claimed it was just ion wind, basically a conventional breeze created by electrical charge. But supposedly, vacuum tests actually ruled out ion wind as the only cause. Brown was literally one of the very first people to successfully patent a device aiming for true, propellantless propulsion. Jumping forward to the modern era, the research gets even more compelling and way better funded. Just look at the timeline for researcher Ning Li. Back in 1996, she was openly collaborating with NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center and the University of Alabama in Huntsville, doing totally open science. By 1999, her research was showing so much promise that she actually left the university and founded her own private company, Antigravity LLC. And then, just 2 years after that, in 2001, bam, she secured a $500,000 contract from the U.S. Department of Defense. This timeline is absolutely crucial because it highlights a clear, undeniable pipeline from open, public academic research straight into private, defense-funded contracts. We're not talking fringe science anymore. We're talking actionable aerospace R&D. And Ning Li definitely wasn't the only one making waves in this space. Our sources point out two major figures making some really incredible claims at the time. Ning Li theorized that applying an AC magnetic field to a superconductor would align the nuclear spin of ions, creating what she called a gravitoelectric effect. Meanwhile, you had Russian scientist Evgeny Podkletnov, who claimed that discharging a high-temperature superconducting disk created actual gravity shielding. He reported a literal 2% reduction in the weight of objects placed directly above it. Now, to be fair, Podkletnov's claims were heavily panned by the mainstream scientific community. It actually led to him being ousted from the University of Tampere in 1997. But there were just enough near replications of his work to keep aerospace engineers very, very interested. Which perfectly tees up Section 3, Boeing, Project Grasp, and corporate espionage. This simmering interest brings us right into the absolute high-stakes era of the early 2000s. Think about it. If even a tiny fraction of these gravity shielding claims were actually true, the financial and military implications would be staggering, game-changing. And that is exactly the moment when massive corporate defense contractors entered the chat. In July 2002, a massive leak happens. A report published by Jane's Defense Weekly revealed that Boeing had acknowledged they were conducting a variety of anti-gravity experiments. This highly sensitive research was reportedly taking place at Boeing's legendary Phantom Works facility out in Seattle. The whole thing operated under an internal acronym, GRASP, which stood for Gravity Research for Advanced Space Propulsion. Now, what's really fascinating about this slide is exactly what the defense industry was investigating so closely. They were heavily looking into Podkletnov's later, and to be clear, highly unverified claims about an impulse gravity generator. Get this, he claimed he could generate a beam of gravity-like energy capable of exerting an instantaneous force of 1,000 Gs on an object. 1,000! That is theoretically enough force to completely vaporize something. Jane's Defense reported that Boeing wasn't even the only one. Massive defense firms like BAE Systems and Lockheed Martin had also been in contact with Podkletnov and were active in this area. Now, we are neutrally reporting these claims directly from the source documents. Whether a 1,000 G beam is physically possible or not is up for debate, but it undeniably triggered a quiet aerospace arms race. However, the defense industry immediately slammed into a huge hurdle. According to the briefing documents, Podkletnov was fiercely anti-military. He made it crystal clear he only wanted to provide assistance if the research was conducted in the white world, which is industry speak for open, public, non-classified development. He absolutely unequivocally did not want his gravity research getting scooped up and turned into weapons by international defense contractors.
And that takes us to Section 4, into the black budget. Seriously, where did all the signs go?
So the white world of open science is pretty much completely incompatible with the secretive realities of aerospace defense. And this deep ideological clash leads us to a fascinating and honestly kind of sudden shift in the modern era of physics. According to the presentation by the Institute for Exotic Science, a distinct pattern emerges. Publicly promising research just vanishes. The popular mechanics articles that used to cover Ning Li, no longer available. Her public output totally ceased after taking that defense money. Similar story with research by Doug Torr at the University of South Carolina, never made public. Podkletnov was effectively sidelined. The presentation points out that most modern anti-gravity research has basically been outsourced to the private sector, swallowed up whole by classified black budgets. And because the rigorous, peer-reviewed science disappeared behind heavily classified doors, it left this massive vacuum in the public sphere.
And what happens to a vacuum? It gets quickly filled with fringe aerospace theories. The Institute's presentation impartially notes quite a few of these circulating claims. You've probably heard rumors of a TR-3B black triangle aircraft supposedly resulting from this hidden research, or theories about so-called alien reproduction vehicles. There's even wild speculation about reactionless thrusters that could potentially warp space-time itself. Now, we definitely aren't here to endorse any of these as actual physical facts, but rather we're showing how intense corporate secrecy inevitably breeds these modern legends. So, the crucial point is, how do we break this cycle of secrecy? Well, in the provided presentation, Amy Eskridge and the Institute for Exotic Science lay out a very specific path forward to drag this research back into the daylight. Step 1, the scientific community has to develop rigorous, testable hypotheses for gravity modification. Step 2, they absolutely must secure independent private funding that is in no way tied to classified military programs. And step 3, they have to actively work to prevent promising scientific results from continually disappearing into black budgets. They firmly believe propellantless propulsion should be developed for the public benefit. The idea is that the next massive leap in physics should belong to all of humanity, not just be locked away in classified defense files. Which really leaves us with a lingering, super provocative question. Think about everything we've covered. If pioneers back in the 1920s were already testing asymmetric capacitance, and the world's biggest defense contractors were taking gravity shielding seriously in the early 2000s, where on earth is the technology today? If billions of dollars have quietly flown into the highly classified black world of aerospace engineering over the last 2 decades, what entirely silent propellantless vehicles might already be flying in the skies above us right now? It's a question that for sure leaves you wanting to look up, and definitely wanting to learn more. Thank you so much for joining me for today's explainer.